I still vividly remember the moment Metroid Prime 2 Echoes was shown off by Reggie at E3 2004. The success of the original Metroid Prime almost guaranteed a sequel, but to receive that next entry so soon was an awesome surprise. Metroid Prime 1 was my favorite game of all time, and the sequel looked bigger, darker, and more challenging. The game finally released in November 2004 to critical acclaim, but it also became a surprisingly divisive entry in the series among Metroid fans. With the release of Metroid Prime Remastered, I find myself thinking about Echoes a lot more than usual as I hope for another remaster. Now, I am personally a big fan of Echoes for a variety of reasons, and I think it's an underappreciated entry in the franchise. However, I also feel that most of the common criticisms lobbed against it are fair and justified. More importantly for this discussion, I believe that both the strengths and weaknesses of this game create compelling reasons for a remake, in some ways maybe even more so than the original. Echoes presents an extremely ambitious vision, a vision that might have even been too big for the GameCube, but that could be fully realized on modern hardware. As a side note, I'm capturing this video on the Wii version, which was ported over with widescreen support and motion controls, just for an improved capture and viewing experience on here. And please remember to hit subscribe to support more content like this. Now, the original Metroid Prime was obviously a highly ambitious game as well. Conceptually, perhaps one of the most ambitious games of all time. Successfully transforming a legendary 2D side-scrolling franchise into a full 3D first-person adventure sounds daunting even 20 years later. However, Retro delivered with near perfection and created some stunning tech for the time to make it happen. Metroid Prime was an intricate and beautiful game. However, with Echoes, Retro decided to take a winning formula and proven tech to pursue a new kind of ambition. They decided to push the Metroid formula, their world design skills, the GameCube hardware, and even the player to the absolute limits. To this day, Echoes is one of the most intricate and complex games I've played in terms of world design. There is so much going on here, so many dramatic design decisions that result in a very intriguing experience to analyze. Echoes was one of the most technically impressive GameCube games, competing with a very elite crowd to even surpass the original in some ways, though I still prefer the art direction of the first game. Echoes takes place on the planet of Aether, a labyrinth world of environmental locks and keys that Metroid is known for. However, the planet's most notable design feature is the infamous Dark Aether. Dark Aether is a mirrored, distorted, dark world version of the map with alternate puzzles, enemies, and challenges. Aether was struck by a terrible calamity that tore the world in half and threatens the extinction of the Luminoth, an intelligent insectoid race. Samus must venture between these opposing worlds, solving interdimensional puzzles to restore the planetary energy and destroy remnants of evil that escaped in the first game in the form of Dark Samus. The Dark World is both an interesting design and technical experiment, which Retro Studios pulled off to varying degrees of success. Dark Aether provides many interesting gameplay scenarios. However, for the context of a remaster, one of the main complaints about the Dark World is its aesthetic. Not only does the very atmosphere damage you, forcing you to carefully hop between regenerative light bubbles, but the overall appearance is very purple. The sky, the environment surfaces, water, creatures, and even plant life are all very dark and dreary looking, with tints of purple, strange red hues, and every shade of dark gray that you can imagine. Although it successfully delivers a feeling of claustrophobia and dread, in my opinion, the Dark World just doesn't always look that great. It's a bit bland at times, and in many ways feels like the GameCube just wasn't quite powerful enough to realize such a dramatic vision. There are certainly moments and areas where the design works well, but overall it can feel like a chore to navigate. While the light versions of the different biomes look very different from one another, the dark versions all start to blend together due to the limited color palette. On the original GameCube version in the 4:3 aspect ratio, the Dark World was even more claustrophobic due to the decreased view area. I can only imagine how much more interesting the Dark World would be with the new lighting design of Metroid Prime Remastered implemented. A similar baked lighting solution with elements of bloom and improved visibility could really do wonders for the dark half of Aether. A remaster could provide transformative levels of visual clarity and an opportunity to tweak or revisit the overall Dark World appearance and color scheme. Higher resolution textures could add greatly needed definition to the often murky surfaces around you. Many players quit or malign Echoes because of the Dark World and how tedious and exhausting it can feel at times. Because of all this, it's easy to forget that some of the best moments in the game, including many of the ambitious boss fights, actually take place in Dark Aether. Quadraxis, the towering robotic quadruped, could come to life with even more imposing and awe-inspiring detail. The battle against the Emperor Ing for the Light of Aether could be far more striking and dramatic. I'm intrigued to see what new models with improved lighting and texture could do for these epic battles. Echoes has fascinating creature designs with greater variety than the first game that could really benefit from an overhaul. The evil Ing could be even more menacing, the dark pirates could be more defined, and so on. Parts of the Dark World are also filled with this murky purple water everywhere. This tainted water kind of reminds me of the flat and bland look of the Magmoor Caverns lava in the original Metroid Prime. Great for its time, but not so interesting today. However, the remaster really transformed that lava into a glowing, lifelike element, and I'm curious to see how that type of transformation could benefit all of the fluids found in Dark Aether. Some sort of toxic glow or subtle illumination on this water could be a really interesting effect. I'm also curious to see if they could somehow streamline certain gameplay elements of the Dark World that bog down the pacing of this game, though this could certainly become controversial very quickly. After completing each region, in order to face the main boss, you also have to collect 3 temple keys that are hidden in that area. There isn't really any information given on their locations, so you kind of just have to explore the Dark World until you find them. This wouldn't be too bad if it weren't for the fact that at the end of the game, you also have to find an additional 9 temple keys scattered throughout the entire Dark World in order to fight the final boss. This is similar to the 12 artifacts of the Chozo Ruins from the first game, but combined with the earlier keys, that means there are 18 keys total. 12 was already pushing it in the original game, and 18 is simply too many. Putting them all in the Dark World also causes the player to have to spend a lot of time there at the very end of the game, which really just slows things down to a crawl. The game does provide logbook clues about where the 9 keys are, but they're a little bit vague and create a lot of tedious searching in Aether's more uninteresting half. I wish this part of the game could be reduced or potentially even removed somehow. The keys are more tedious to track down than the Chozo artifacts and require a special visor to even be able to see them, which you don't get until later in the game. This makes it almost impossible to pick up the keys along the way as you play the game. Echoes is already longer than Prime 1, so I'm not sure why this Dark World game padding was necessary. Once you know where all the keys are, it's not a huge deal to get them on subsequent playthroughs, but for newcomers they may want to consider reducing these keys, similar to how they decreased the Triforce Shard quest in the Wind Waker remake. These keys are woven into many elements of the game though, so I doubt this will happen. Echoes also makes use of a controversial ammo system for the light and dark beams, which are more effective against certain enemy types in the light and dark worlds. I am personally not as offended by this system as a lot of people seem to be, since without ammo limits the beams would be overpowered. However, I do think ammo is a little too scarce and becomes a chore to manage. Starting out with higher ammo capacity or making additional expansions that are easier to find could improve this system. I'm very hesitant though to start endorsing too many gameplay changes like these, since I love that the Prime 1 remaster basically kept the original game design identical. However, I think Echoes also has more obvious issues with polish and pacing than its predecessor, particularly with these Dark World systems, so minor changes to the progression could help it shine a little more brightly. Between the atmospheric drain on health, beam ammo management, discovering endless keys, going in and out of the Dark World constantly, and manually transferring temple energy from the Dark World to the light, you can certainly see why the Dark World side of the game starts to feel like a chore. But enough about the Dark World. Despite its notoriety, you actually do spend less time in the Dark World than on Light Aether, which in contrast is visually stunning for the time. The environments in Echoes are truly impressive for a GameCube game. Most of these biomes are more ambitious and larger in scale than what we saw in the first game. Upgraded versions could truly be something special. The industrial structures of the temple grounds could really come to life with new mechanical details and high-res texture work. The barren rocks and sands of the Aegon Wastes could benefit from more dramatic lighting and better particle work. The soaked Torvus Bog could find new life with better water effects and more alive vegetation. And my personal favorite, the environment that I think could benefit the most from a graphical overhaul out of any region of the 3D Metroids, the Sanctuary Fortress. This technological fortress delivers truly amazing art design and intricate details that push the GameCube to its limits. The blurry surface lights below the temple could be revealed in new clarity. The endless artificial light sources and morph ball tracks and interesting surface patterns could really take advantage of the bloom and dynamic lighting solutions we saw in the first remaster. The mechanical enemies could be rebuilt with new detail. We already saw how much the Metroid Prime Remaster overhauled the technology labs of the Pirate Frigate and Phendrana Drifts, and all those designs are really on overdrive in the Sanctuary Fortress. The larger environments of Echoes just have so much potential on more powerful hardware. Apart from the world design itself, Echoes is also filled with all kinds of visual effects that could benefit from an upgrade. There are particles everywhere in this game, whether it's the beam weapons, random creature or environment effects, explosions, and so on. Some of these effects look fine, but others have not aged well and could really use an upgrade. For example, I've always thought the dark beam cannon looked kind of strange in this game. The light suit teleportation cutscene is a major eyesore, and the dark visor is, well, something. Other effects that do work well, such as the echo visor and the light beam, could be enhanced further. The inky pools of darkness that the Ing emerge from could look even cooler with new particle and material work. So Echoes is a visually stunning game, but there are other technical aspects beyond just the visuals that could really be enhanced by a remaster. One annoying quirk of this game are the thinly disguised loading screens whenever you transition between the light and the dark worlds. These cutscenes aren't terribly long, but in some parts of the game you switch back and forth frequently enough that this becomes super annoying since it's the same video clip over and over again. Echoes already has the same elevator ride loading times as the first game, so overall it just feels like there's a lot more loading going on here in general. Shortening or even replacing the dimension shift cutscene with some sort of rapid transition should be a top priority in the remaster. Metroid Prime Remastered eliminated all of the smaller loading times hidden behind slow-to-open doors that we saw on GameCube, so I'm hoping this loading transition can be reduced, even if it can't be eliminated. Echoes would also greatly benefit from the new dual analog control scheme of the remaster. The sequel is arguably a more vertical game than the original Prime. Echoes features huge boss battles, high fortress towers, deep underwater chambers, and generally larger environments. I distinctly remember having to frequently pause to look up and down on the GameCube version when playing with the original control scheme, which limited vertical camera movement. The free aiming motion controls on the Wii improved this situation quite a bit, but I think dual analog controls could work wonders here and help the game reach its potential. In some ways, Echo's ambition also extends to its storyline. I think some people forget that, for better or worse, Echoes actually has a fairly active story for a Metroid game. Unlike the first game, where the story is revealed almost exclusively through the scan visor and logbook entries, Echoes includes a few speaking NPCs and more story-driven cutscenes. A surviving Luminoth character named Umos even interacts with Samus and delivers a fair amount of exposition. I really liked Umos as a limited character, and I'd love to see what a redesign could do for him. Now, story presentation can be a bit divisive among Metroid fans. Some prefer the completely isolated, discover-it-yourself approach of something like Super Metroid or the original Metroid Prime. Others like the approach of Metroid Prime 3, which basically delivers full cinematics with voice-acted characters. Personally, I really enjoy the middle-of-the-road approach for Metroid. I prefer the story delivery of games like Echoes, Metroid Dread, and to some degree Metroid Fusion, where Samus is left alone for long periods of time to explore the world, but there are still big story moments that feature limited interactions with other characters. I bring up this point about story delivery because I think the plot of Echoes specifically would translate really well to the graphics and presentation of a remaster like we saw with Prime 1. The story beats that are here could really be elevated by enhanced character models and visuals without having to worry about how full story cinematics with extensive acting and dialogue would translate to such a visual overhaul. A few Federation soldiers, alien creatures, and Samus's character model could all be visually upgraded without risking losing the overall feel of the storytelling which is still fairly subtle. In comparison, I think this would be a significantly greater challenge to get right in a game like Metroid Prime 3, but we'll save that discussion for the next video. Anyways, I began this analysis with a question of whether Echoes could potentially benefit from a remaster even more than the original Prime. And I think in some ways, yes, maybe, at least from a raw technical perspective and a second chance at refinements. But in other ways, no, probably not. Echoes is less polished in its core execution and is at times an overly convoluted and uneven experience. Both games are amazing and deserve a remake in different ways, so perhaps there is a better question. Would we, or I as the player, benefit from an Echoes remaster as much or more than the original Prime? And I think the answer to that, at least for me, is definitively no. Part of the reason the original Metroid Prime Remaster is so powerful is its nostalgia, legacy, and perfectly executed vision. Reliving that original bold transition to 3D all over again in beautiful new graphics is something special. Prime 1 has near-perfect pacing, design, and amazing environments that really draw you in. There's something about that specific world and the singular focus of polished, uninterrupted, isolated exploration that effortlessly sticks with you long after you play. Echoes, on the other hand, in some ways gets lost in its own ambition, the shadow of its predecessor, and the shadows of the Dark World. Aether is so complex and the Dark World so heavy that some of the joy of exploration and immersion doesn't come through quite as easily. Hardcore fans will appreciate this depth, but you're always fighting for every bit of progression. The heaviness can really hurt the replayability factor that can sometimes drive personal attachment. That initial wow factor of seeing Metroid in 3D was already established in the first game, and the new type of ambition Echoes offers just isn't quite as memorable. Remasters thrive on legacy and re-delivering a game as good or even better as you remember it. I think for some players, Echoes might just conjure up a few too many frustrations to hold a completely untainted legacy. There is certainly nostalgia here, but the shadows of the Dark World linger in the background. I don't think a graphical remaster could completely iron out all of these wrinkles, but I'm still so curious to see how much these issues could be improved through a remaster. Now, there are of course rumors that Prime 2 and 3 will be made available on Switch before Prime 4, but that they might just be up-resed ports instead of full remasters. I think this would be a huge missed opportunity, particularly in the case of Echoes, and I hope that's not the case. The reception to the first remaster has just been incredible. I'm so interested to see Echoes reach its full opportunity, and it would be a fascinating contrast to the original game. In so many ways, they are similar, yet when you actually sit down and play them, they're almost completely different experiences. Regardless of what happens, I'm so glad we received Metroid Prime Remastered. If they do only have limited resources available, I think they definitely went about it the right way. Go all in on the first game to really capture the essence and vision of this trilogy. Obviously, they were never going to start with Echoes, but the first game remains the heart of the trilogy either way, and the remaster helps keep this amazing series alive. I'm also glad they were willing and brave enough to fully remaster at least one and leave the other two as is, instead of just simply porting all three of them over at once for consistency. However, although playing the Metroid Prime Remaster was an immensely satisfying experience, it also left me wanting more. It made me want to see what a fully realized version of the more complicated, challenging, and intricate sequel could achieve with the same level of care put into it. Personally, I hope for additional remasters as they take their time and make Prime 4 the same caliber, maybe even as a cross-gen title so we can see further enhancements on more powerful hardware. Until then, I'll happily continue replaying Metroid Prime Remastered, but in the back of my mind I'll also continue hoping that the underappreciated sequel eventually becomes more than a distant echo. Thanks so much for watching, and please hit subscribe for more content like this.